Yes, I would like to thank Monsieur Jean Kellens for the invitation to this conference and Madame Redard pour son aide. The lack of clear archaeological evidence has been to date one of the main reasons behind the difficulty in defining the religion of the Achéménides, which is in fact the issue to which we owe our presence here in the Collège de France. The problem is by no means new, and the brilliant État de question by Rémy Boucharlat in 1984 can be considered the basis for discussion. In fact, the greatest advance in knowledge on the subject since that year has come more from the study of the Persepolis text than from new archaeological discoveries or interpretations. Let us summarize Boucharlat's statements. The main subject of his paper consists in the cult places of the Achéménides, which take us back to two basic questions. The first, quelle était la religion des Achéménides? Était-ce la vieille religion iranienne ou déjà le Zoroastrisme? Quel culte était pratiqué? The second, les monuments que nous connaissons sont-ils des temples? Leur architecture et leur aménagement intérieur permettent-ils d'en décider? And the article consequently divides into a first chapter on the religion, with distinction between beliefs and cults, and a second chapter on the monuments. In the closing section, Boucharlat considers as possible temples the so-called Frataraka building at Persepolis, the so-called Ayadana at Susa, the complex at Kuche-Khwaja, and the building number 3 at Dahaneye Golaman, but insists that for none of them is there firm evidence for an Achaemenid dating. The only reliable cult evidence for the Achaemenid period, therefore, is represented by the sacred precinct with the two monumental stone plinths at Pasargadae, datable to the 6th century BC, corresponding to the Persian religious practices described by Herodotus. This does not necessarily mean that there were no temples in the Achaemenid period, particularly because from 550 to 330 BC, the cult and religious architecture could have evolved considerably as the changes attributed to Artaxerxes II suggest. Supposing that the four monuments were indeed temples and belonged to the Achaemenid period, Boucharlat continues, they would point to the existence of two types of cult places, a very closed one consisting in a square hall with four pillars surrounded by a corridor, and a hypaetral one, such as at Dahaneye Golaman. The article ends suggesting that all the existing evidence relates to the dynastic environment, and the illustration of common places of cults is limited to the small stepped altars found in private houses at Dahaneye Golaman. This is what Boucharlat was able to state on the basis of the evidence available in 1984. 30 years later, no major new archaeological discovery has been safely attributed to Achaemenid religious architecture, and most of the new excavated monuments with a religious function from this age are located in eastern Iran, with no link to the Persian dynasty. At the same time, our advance in knowledge has been largely in a negative direction. The complex at Kuche-Khwaja, the Susa Ayadana, and the Persepolis so-called Frataraka temple can in fact definitely be removed from the list of Achaemenid monuments. At the same time, the Italian excavators of building QN3 at Dahaneye Golaman are providing results from the study of ceramic archival material pointing to an Achaemenid dating for the building in a perspective of cults of a local nature. As for this Sistanian site, the Iranian excavations have also provided more evidence of a hypothesized religious function, even though this function, or indeed association with the Achaemenid dynasty, is far from proven. Along with these advances, a few more innovative but hypothetical interpretations of the known archaeological evidence have been proposed, strengthening the perception of a veritable network of installations dedicated to rituals linked to the kings. But would like first to propose a new approach to the problem of the archaeological evidence for the religion of the Achaemenids, with a preliminary remark regarding the definition of religious architectures versus ritual architecture. As we shall see, in Achaemenid architecture there is more than one instance of evidence linked to rituals of various nature, from royal initiation to offerings for the benefit of the kings, in a way that seems to continue in the practices of the Sasanian period. Excluding these monuments from the realm of religious architecture would mean imposing a conception of religion which is far closer to a modern construction of ethical beliefs such as Christianity or Islam, than to the complex supernatural world of ancient societies, where kingship is one of the fundamental pillars of religion. Lacking evidence of temples dedicated to this or that deity, we are unable to locate the known cults presupposing a system of beliefs and rituals performed by the people of ancient Persia. But the evidence of rituals within the dynastic complexes is itself part of the religion of the kings, in the sense that the rituals were a necessary support to kingship through contact with the supernatural world. The Achaemenid inscriptions celebrate the fortunate association of the king with Ahura Mazda, to whom credit for the success of the king is attributed. The royal architecture repeats this statement wherever possible, even though no major building such as a temple is known to have been dedicated to Ahura Mazda. The link between the king and his god remains celebrated only in the words of the king, probably because the king did not feel it necessary to materialize it for his subjects, due to the specific approach of the Persians, which is well described by Herodotus for its singularity. If I may touch on a subject which is beyond my scope, Ahura Mazda is acknowledged with the success of the Persian king, just as Ashur is with that of the Neo-Assyrian king. But Ahura Mazda is never identified as the king, unlike Ashur in the Assyrian ceremony of inthronization of the new earthly king. I propose, therefore, a change in perception, acknowledging the great importance of what I propose to define as the ritual architecture of the Achaemenids, which recent studies have illustrated so well, and which is in full agreement with the reading of the many tablets referring to various rituals carried out on the Persepolis terrace. Before starting on discussion, a second preliminary remark is necessary. I will confine my attention to the religious ritual architecture within the dynastic circle of the Persian kings of the 6th-4th centuries BC, leaving aside the broader question of the religion of the peoples living on the Iranian plateau during the Achaemenid period. For the latter, in fact, the discovery at Veshnave in the Kashan region of a sacred cave where offerings were made to the element of water, with finds from the 8th century BC to the 8th century AD, offers major archaeological evidence for an understanding of the Iranian religious background and common cult practices. The Veshnave evidence is not totally unrelated to our subject, because, as has been pointed out by Jennifer Rose, the use that the Achaemenids made of the Neo-Elamite natural sacred place at Nakhshe-Rostam may be rooted in their acceptance of that tradition. Indeed, this fact has a bearing on the relationships between the Persians and the Elamites in the religious sphere, which is one of the items of discussion in this colloquium. Allow me to recall here also that the reverence rendered to water and springs is evident in the choice by Darius I of the rock cliff Bisotun, dominating a spring and facing a probable waterfall now dried up, as well as in the monumental terrace at Gadamgah in Fars, on which I will come later. In 2006, in a paper dedicated to the connection between Sasanian rock reliefs and water, I investigated the specific link between water and kingship during the Sasanian period. The Veshnave find brings us back to the need to stress the significance of water with its ideological implications also for the pre-Sasanian period. My third remark takes me to the limit of this paper. Archaeological indicators pertaining to the religion of the Achaemenids can be sought not only in the architectural complexes which they built, but also in the figurative imagery found in them. However, on the second aspect, the colloquium program has started with a presentation by Mark Garrison, who has illustrated with his very deep insight the divine imagery at Persepolis. I will therefore concentrate rather on architecture and archaeological contexts of direct dynastic attribution. No new archaeological evidence regarding religious ritual function has come to light in recent years, with the possible exception of the monument excavated by our joint Iranian-Italian archaeological mission in Fars at Tolle-a-Giori in the area of Baghe-Firouzi, circa 3.5 kilometers to the west of the Persepolis Terrace. But I will come to this point at the end of this paper. Most of the new elements for discussion derive from new interpretations of the known evidence. The first study regards some of the monuments on the Persepolis Terrace, for which Shahrokh Razmjou, whom I thank for having showed me some papers which I did not know, provides good evidence for an interpretation with ritual significance. Razmjou, prompted by the many mentions of culture and rituals in the Persepolis Elamite tablets, had already proposed a new and well-grounded interpretation of the stone installations located at the northwest foot of the platform of the Tachara. Here, the Iranian archaeologist located a room used for performing sacrifices, which would have been added by Xerxes, who also changed the name of the building to Hadish. In a second work of 2010, the cultic interpretation is globally extended by Razmjou to the entire Tachara building, as well as the similar so-called Hadish. The main element for this new functional attribution is the interpretation of the reliefs carved on the parapet of the Tachara southern stairway, as well as of the windows of the Hadish. The many figures walking up the stairs, bearing food, vessels, liquid, and small heads of cattle, generally identified as servants carrying supplies for the royal table, on the basis of comparisons with other images of the Achaemenid period from Daskylion and Susa, are more likely to be priests. The food, therefore, would be regarded as offerings, and the cattle would be brought for sacrifice, to be carried out in the separate area for sacrifice previously identified. The change in function is attributed to Xerxes, who also built a larger Hadish, also characterized by images of individuals carrying small heads of cattle. The possibility that the interpretation of the reliefs should correspond to the interpretation of the building is indeed to be shared, because in other Achaemenid monuments also, figural decoration seems to be a means to describe the function of the architecture, such as, for example, the stairways reliefs in the Apadana. However, the presence of these priests should not necessarily mean that the building was a palace temple. As the Shabur I inscription as Naksharostam exemplifies for the Sasanian period, a ritual offering could be carried out for the benefit of the king more than for an offering to God, thus not completely corresponding to what we could define as religious. At any rate, I agree with Razmjou that the two buildings cannot have had a mere residential function. However, rather than a strong religious significance, as Razmjou proposes, I would prefer to propose a ritual significance. A point for reflection in this regard is that the plan of the Tachara, but also of the Hadish, shows no comparative trait common to other known structures with proper religious functions in Iran or in Mesopotamia. Razmjou's interpretation would extend the use of the hypostyle hall also to the equivalent of a temple, but the evidence is not enough. I would rather accept that the two hypostyle halls of the Tachara and the Hadish saw the celebration of the rituals in honor of the kings, which we see depicted in their architectural reliefs. With this point in mind, we move on the third paper on this subject, largely based on Razmjou's doctoral dissertation and presented at a conference in Munich in collaboration with Michael Rove. In this article, the authors present old and new hypotheses of ritual function of several of the Persepolis buildings, which they often tend to interpret in religious terms. In the area of Persepolis South, Herzfeld and later Tajvidi had associated with the cult of fire two of the complexes of the area, respectively Palace C and Palace G. The main evidence in the case of the former is a square stone block which Herzfeld interpreted as a fire altar, and in the case of the latter, the fact that wood or ashes were found in rooms to the north and south of a square hall with a central mud brick platform. On the slope of Kuhe Rahmat, besides, in one of the rooms in front of the southern tomb, a stone offering basin suggests to the author that religious ceremonies took place there. Also in this case, the installations attest to the performance of offerings for the deceased kings, which should not necessarily be interpreted as a religious ritual. In the same paper, Ranjou and Roth confirm the religious attribution of the Tachara and the Hadish discussed above, and also propose again the old interpretation as a temple of Achaemenid date for the two complexes of the so-called Frataraka temple, advanced by De Frankovic in 1966. Since in 2007 I dedicated part of my second lecture here in the Collège de France to this subject, I do not wish to bore the Parisian audience again with my interpretation of the structures, but will refer to what has been published. I think, however, that it is necessary to insist on chronology, given the ample actual evidence we have against an attribution to the Achaemenid period. More than one element clashes with an Achaemenid dating, and not only the size of the bricks, which is the only one mentioned by our colleagues. The authors take post-Achaemenid to mean belonging to the period of the Fratarakas, which is indeed much later than the end of the Achaemenid period, and do not mention the hypothesis of a Hellenistic dating, suggested instead by the Greek inscriptions, by the moldings of the stepped base, and by the presence of a cult statue in marble. At any rate, for the Persepolis terrace, I wish to add that Dietrich Huff has also underlined the strong religious significance of the Apadana foundation deposits, which he compares to the ancient tradition attested at Vaishnava, and which is to be seen in comparison with the Mesopotamian tradition. The second site, which has seen a new interpretation, is Pasargade, where the so-called sacred precinct, which has been linked by Henkelmann to the ship ceremony, has recently been interpreted anew by Pierre Amier in its architectural form. The proposal of the French scholar, based on detailed observation of the two extant stone plinths and of their setting, is to interpret them as the stone basis for a wooden superstructure in the form of a tower. These two wooden towers would have anticipated the architectural type of stone-built towers of the Dane Soleiman and Kabeye Zardosht, representing their archaic model. There are some elements in favor of this hypothesis. The spaces at the top of the cubes for possible additional elements, and particularly the imposing stone foundations, which would appear oversized if there had not been a further structure above the plinth. Amier's interesting proposal brings me again to the question of the interpretation of the two towers of Pasargade and Nakhcherostan, for which the latest acceptable hypothesis into my mind remains that of Helene Sansisi-Werdenburg, despite a sarcastic comment by Dan Potts. Her brilliant paper was published only 1 year before Boucharlat's article and was not known to him, because he ended the section of the two towers, I quote, "En définitive, les deux tours ne sont ni des tombes ni des lieux de culte, tout au plus des lieux sacrés." End of quotation. This generic ritual attribution was better specified by the Dutch scholar, who, following upon a proposal by Richard Fry, suggested associating the monuments with the ritual of royal initiation carried out at Pasargade by Artaxerxes II. What matters to our purpose is the fact that Plutarch calls the building where this ritual takes place a temple of a warlike goddess. On the basis of this information, as well as of the ceremony which took place there, we can definitely assign a dynastic ritual function to the two towers. We may conclude this list of new interpretations of known monuments, mentioning that the detailed analysis which Jean-Claude Bessac carried out at Kadamgah in Central Fars has proved that the rock-cut terrace is not unfinished and that its working technique can be attributed to the Achaemenid period. Given that the terrace dominates a spring, even now active in periods of abundant rains, the most likely function of the monument is a ritual one, in which the role of water finds support in the evidence of Eshnavet. The connection with the dynastic environment is borne out by the monumental typology of the terrace, which is similar in dimensions to the Achaemenid tombs at Persepolis. Now, before concluding, I wish to introduce you to the monument which is being excavated by the joint Iranian-Italian archaeological mission at Tolle Agiori under the direction of Alireza Ascari-Chaverdi and myself. The site, known through previous surface surveys and geophysical prospections carried out by the joint Iranian-French mission, was first excavated in 2011, with work going on also in 2012. Preliminary information on the two first seasons is soon to appear in the journal Arta, with a full presentation not only of the excavations but also of the prospections and their interpretation. Following upon these remarkable results, also the 2013 season of the Iranian-Italian Joint Archaeological Mission has been dedicated to the excavations of this building carried out in September and October 2013. I thank Dr. Ascari-Chaverdi for allowing me to present here, besides a brief description of the building, also the unpublished work freshly carried out, along with the still very preliminary and speculative interpretation. The excavations ended only last week, and time for further reflection was lacking. However, the interest of the discovery is indeed great and worth of discussion. As a result of the last excavation, which modified the preliminary description as a square building, advanced on the basis of the geophysical surveys and of the 2011 and 2012 excavated areas, we know that the Tolle Agiori building has a rectangular shape measuring at least 35.70 by 30 meters, oriented with the main axis from west-northwest to east-southeast, and is formed by a massive wall of a width of 10 meters, which reaches 12 meters on the southeast side, and which encloses an inner room 10 meters wide. A large entrance has been evidenced at the middle of the southern east side, while the information obtained on the central room is still insufficient. These are the walls which have been identified thanks to the excavated trenches. This is the entrance, which we discovered just a few weeks ago. Only short parts of the 3 of the 4 walls have so far been brought to light, along with the south corner. The southwest and northeast wall have a mud brick core, and you see here, measuring 4 meters in width, and 2 outer sections on its 2 faces, each of 2.5 meters in width, made in baked clay bricks. These are various views of the spoliated parts in baked bricks. The 2 outer rows of baked bricks use bitumen as a mortar. The outer facing is in baked clay glazed square bricks, measuring 35 by 35 by 8 centimeters, and fragments of glazed brick reliefs in the various collapsed layers indicate the existence of rich relief and glazed figural decoration recalling the panels from Neo-Babylonian monuments in Babylon. The connection with Achaemenid dynastic environment is suggested by the find of a fragment of Babylonian cuneiform sign rendered in color on the surface of a glazed brick, which has been interpreted by Gianpietro Basello as part of the word sharru. An important observation regards the conservation of the building. The ruins of the monument were used as a source for building materials, probably in rather recent times, since a series of wall robber trenches have been evidenced in the upper stratigraphy above the lower accumulation and collapse layers, reaching to a considerable depth, so that most of the baked brick wall were found spoliated, at places as far down as the clay basement on which the structure had been built, as you see here, for example, or here, in this part, yes. These conditions have made the excavation extremely difficult and slow. However, there is also evidence of an ancient destruction which produced the fragmentation of wood quality baked bricks. In particular, the very bad state of preservation of the figural glazed relief bricks, mostly consisting in small fragments, suggests an intentional destruction. Unfortunately, there are no chronological markers for this episode, but some bone fragments for the secondary occupation following it will hopefully be useful for dating analysis, providing a terminus ante quem. The accumulations of collapsed bricks have also the characteristic more of being heaped up than of proper collapses, deriving from a destructive earthquake, the only natural event which could have destroyed walls of the exceptional width of 10 meters and more. It is for the moment impossible to advance any hypothesis as to the complete plan and original height of the building. However, the width of the walls suggests that the elevation should be considerable, such as that of a tower-like building, possibly of various stories. As for the plan, the recent discovery that the building is rectangular makes the comparison with the two tower buildings of Zindane Soleiman and Kabeye Zardosht and with the Urartian temples proposed in the draft version circulated among the colleagues less consistent. On the other hand, the use in the same building of both mud brick and baked brick, of bitumen mortar and of glazed bricks for decoration is typical of the Mesopotamian and Elamite traditions, and the system of fitter marks evidenced on the upper surface of the glazed bricks found in situ echoes the same sign recorded at the palace of Darius I at Susa and various Mesopotamian sites. What is really surprising is the perfect correspondence of the fantastic animal motifs present on the glazed bricks of the monument with those present at Babylon in the Ishtar Gate. Thanks to the kind initiative of the IFRI and the assistance of the Musée du Louvre and of other French scholars, which I thank also on behalf of my Iranian colleague, Mr. Emad Matin, in charge of the study of the bricks, was able to verify a perfect superimposition of the two sets of bricks, even in size and in the composition of the panels. The two main subjects represented, as in the Ishtar Gate, are the bull, and you see here some of the bricks regarding the bull, and the mushhushu, while there are a few fragments suggesting also the lion motif as well as many fragments of rosettes in glaze only. Whereas the bull is present also on the decoration of the Darius Palace of Susa, albeit in different size, the mushhushu is attested nowhere else in monumental Achaemenid art. The iconographic feature, along with the technical aspect of the production of glazed clay bricks, including material and size, link our building to a Babylonian environment and to an early phase of Persian art, placing the monument in the blank of the pre-Terras Persepolis area. The possibility that after the acquisition of Mesopotamia in 539 BC, Cyrus the Great or Cambyses could have resorted to Babylonian craftsmen using molds similar to those used for Babylonian monuments must in this case be borne in mind. The suppression of the mushhushu from subsequent Achaemenid monumental iconography must be explained perhaps at the light of its snake nature, which may have recalled evil creatures, perhaps the divas against whom Xerxes turned his attention. The chronology of the first destruction of the monument will therefore need the maximum attention. At any rate, we must keep in mind that the high tower-like monument with a glazed brick facing was visible from far away in the Persepolis plain and particularly from the Persepolis terrace, and was dominating its landscape. The presence on this monument not only of the bull but also of the mushhushu, in Babylonia considered a symbol of the royal god Marduk and adopted also by the Elamite religious iconography, corresponds well with the heterogeneous religious environment of ancient Persia, which Henkelmann has outlined on the basis of the Persepolis tablets. At any rate, for this building it's very difficult to propose any function other than a ceremonial or a ritual one. Also in this case, however, we may possibly find more evidence illustrating a function connected with the celebration of the king's fortune rather than a monument to the glory of God. Thank you.